Welcome to all who are joining us today. Whether you're listening or viewing from near or far, we're glad you're part of who we are at McLean Church. At the beginning of each new year, I think most people are thinking about how to make their lives better. Some people take this very seriously by doing things like joining a gym or creating a new budget or writing down a list of goals they hope to accomplish in the next 12 months. Others of us aren't quite so intentional, but still, most people, I think, are somewhat thoughtful about ways in which they hope their lives can improve in the year ahead. And our culture has no shortage of suggestions for how our lives can be improved in the months ahead. Consider just a few headlines from my newsfeed this past week. From BBC Science, how to finally break your procrastination habit. A good piece of advice for the beginning of the year. Or this from Real Simple magazine, habit stacking is the easiest way to make new habits last. Or this one from Olive, the 10 foods you should be eating more of for your health. From Health magazine, 6 surprising natural remedies to help combat inflation. Or this one from Newsweek, drinking 1 glass of this common beverage a day could cut your risk of cancer. I had to click on that one, and by the way, the drink they're suggesting is a glass of milk. This one from CBS, should I open a short or long-term CD this January? From the Wall Street Journal, if you want to sell your house, figure out what to renovate first. One of my favorites from Newsweek, 5 things you should clean after getting norovirus to avoid reinfection. From Fox News, 7 signs you might have ADHD and what steps to take. From Very Well magazine, a complement to the previous article, how to embrace your ADHD traits and thrive. From Self magazine, 7 ways to ease flight anxiety. And from Martha Stewart, 9 evergreen trees to never plant in your yard. It seems everyone has a piece of advice for us that proposes to make our lives better. In fact, every culture seemingly has a body of advice literature or self-improvement literature designed and intended to help us understand life better and live life better. In the ancient world, the Jewish people also had this kind of literature or these kind of stories or pieces of advice. Now, the stories or pieces weren't about norovirus or ADHD or eliminating flight anxiety, but they were about issues that concerned people in the ancient world. Many of those issues still concern us today. Scholars refer to these ancient writings or stories as wisdom literature. And wisdom literature was an attempt by people of the past to better understand their lives and to better understand how life was to be best lived. Now we have a block of this literature preserved for us in the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament. These wisdom writings are typically identified as the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. Each of these books, in its own way, provides insight into how people in the ancient world understood life, what they understood life to be about. Specifically, they reveal how people in the ancient world believed life could be lived and experienced successfully. And again, while the details of their insights were different from the details of our lives, for instance, they talked about traveling by horse instead of airplane and the risks of borrowing from a neighbor instead of investing in short or long-term CDs. Their insights are remarkably still applicable to our circumstances today. And you know what? Their insights from the ancient world, they've stood the test of time. The book of Proverbs is composed in its present form, we think, around the year 500 BCE. So 2,500 years later, we're still reading it and still learning from its wisdom. There's something about insights that have been around for almost 3,000 years that make you stop and say, maybe there's something to what these ancient authors wrote and said. And today we want to begin by understanding the background of this book and then looking at some of the ways to read and understand it properly. So, as mentioned earlier, the book of Proverbs is found roughly in the middle of the Old Testament, and we think the book was composed in its present form somewhere around 500 BCE. So if you remember the broad history of Israel that we often sketch out in our talks, this would place this book in the post-exile period. That is after the exile in Babylon, during the period of the rebuilt or the Second Temple. So scholars often refer to a book like Proverbs as Second Temple literature. The book is a collection of sayings, many of them attributed to King Solomon, who was noted in ancient Israel for his wisdom. Now, whether the sayings actually came from Solomon or simply were associated with his reign and his reputation, we don't know. But what we do know is that these sayings seemingly circulated in ancient Israel for a long period of time before they were actually written down. In the post-exile period, someone or some group of people took the time to write these sayings down and put them into the collection that is the book of Proverbs that we have today. Now, the sayings are arranged in the book of Proverbs in two parts. Chapters 1 through 9 string sayings together in the form of a story that contrasts two ways to approach life: the wise way and the foolish way. The wise way is described as leading to life. The foolish way is described as leading to death. Now, this life and death is not so much a description of physical life or physical death, and it's definitely not a description of heaven or hell, as there aren't any such concepts in ancient Judaism. Instead, it is a description of how to experience a meaningful and fulfilling existence, that is, life, compared to what it means to live an unmeaningful or unsatisfactory existence, death. Foolishness is often portrayed in this section as an adulteress, trying to lure people away from the path of true wisdom and insight. In this section, chapters 1 through 9, true wisdom begins with an awareness of or recognition of God. Listen to how the book starts. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. This book is about learning how to live. A right approach and a wrong approach to life will be illustrated and contrasted. There is a wise way and a foolish way to live. The fear of the Lord, not fear in terms of being afraid of, but fear in terms of recognizing or recognition of God, is the starting point of the right way to live or the wise way to live. Now, it should be noted, and please perhaps write this thought down or at least keep it in the back of your mind. wisdom in ancient Judaism will be the basis for morality. The reason we do certain things and don't do other things is because the things we do represent our understanding of the wise way to live. Christian morality is based on this same concept, with the further definition of wisdom being found in the imperative to love. So for instance, in ancient Judaism, you don't sleep around if you're married, not because there was some arbitrary restriction on sexual expression, but because it's just not a wise way to live, as history and experience has shown us. So again, in chapters 1 through 9 of the book of Proverbs, there's a contrast between two ways of approaching life: a wise way and a foolish way, a path that leads to life and a path that leads to death. The second part of the book, chapters 10 through 31, with chapter 31 being a bit of an exception, record for us individual wisdom sayings, short, pithy, memorable statements about how life works best. And again, most cultures have such sayings. A stitch in time saves 9. Look before you leap. A penny saved is a penny earned. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. You get the idea. Short, memorable sayings that contain what our culture considers wise approaches to life. Proverbs chapters 10 through 31 are filled with such sayings. And remember, these sayings were originally written in Hebrew, so they don't sound quite as pithy when translated into English, but you'll quickly get the idea. Consider a few examples. One who forgives an affront fosters friendship, but one who dwells on disputes will alienate a friend. Laziness brings on deep sleep. An idle person will suffer hunger. This one from Proverbs 11. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Or this from Proverbs 14. Leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not find words of knowledge. Perhaps my favorite. Better a dinner of vegetables where love is than a fatted ox and hatred with it. Good stuff, right? Let's provide some insight on how these sayings should be read and how they should and should not be understood. First, it's important to note that these sayings are poetry, not prose. They're written in rhyme and verse. They're not written as a technical discourse. That means two important things. First, these sayings are filled with imagery that is not always meant to be taken or applied literally. For instance, Proverbs 26:27 says this: whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Now here, the author is not suggesting that you should never dig a hole in the ground or never move a rock. Instead, he's using imagery from the ancient world, digging a pit to trap someone in it, or positioning a stone as in a trap to roll down on an unsuspecting victim. The proverb writer says if you set out to do harm to others, especially to try to get even with others, you'll often get caught or wounded in your own scheme. The images in the Proverbs, they point us to larger truths than literal words can convey. That's what poetry does. So when you read the book of Proverbs, identify the imagery so that you can discover the larger meaning of the proverb. The second important thing to note about understanding the book of Proverbs is as Hebrew poetry, it is composed along the principles of Hebrew poetry, which is largely built around parallelism. That is, the second line of a stanza often repeats or contrasts what the first line says. So for instance, look at Proverbs 27, 23, and 24. Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds. For riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Note how the second line of each stanza repeats and further defines the idea of the first stanza. In this case, promoting the idea that one should stay engaged in life and not check out or coast. Recognizing the parallelism that again can either repeat the idea of the first line of a stanza or contrast the idea of the first stanza. Recognizing that parallelism can often help us better understand the point the author is trying to make. Now, the second big thing to note about the book of Proverbs is that the Proverbs represent general observations about life that have stood the test of time. General observations. The Proverbs are not promises. Consider again Proverbs 26:27. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Sometimes. Maybe even most of the time. But not always. This is a general observation about how life most of the time works. But there are always exceptions. Consider the oft-quoted Proverbs 22:6. Start children off on the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not turn from it. Generally speaking, yes, but not always. The Proverbs are not intended to be universal guarantees. They are instead statements of likely outcomes. But there are always exceptions. Remember what the other two wisdom books in the Old Testament are? Ecclesiastes and Job. Ecclesiastes argues that you can do all the right things, even many of the things the book of Proverbs suggests, and life can still seem meaningless. And the book of Job argues that you can follow the path of wisdom and life sometimes still collapses around you. Fascinating that within this ancient wisdom tradition, there's a built-in tension. The tension of life. Life often works in certain defined ways, but it is always ultimately unpredictable. So how do you read the Proverbs? Or more importantly, how do you apply them? Well, they are good and wise general observations about life. They're not intended to be promises, guarantees, or universal mandates. The early bird gets the worm is a good general observation about life. But sometimes you get up early and still don't find any worms. And sometimes it's more important to sleep in than to get up early. Yet still we value this present day proverb as good, sound advice. Think about that for just a bit. Now I'd like to challenge you this week to begin reading the book of Proverbs. Now, a practice that many people have found helpful is to read one chapter of Proverbs each day. There are 31 chapters in the book, which means you can read one chapter each day of the month. So start with whatever day it happens to be and read the corresponding chapter. So if it's January 13th, read Proverbs chapter 13. You get the idea. In this way, you're inserting this ancient wisdom into your everyday experience. Why is that important? It's important because we need to hear alternative voices. We need voices that challenge and confront, and at times confirm, the popular wisdom of our day. The articles from our news feed can often be helpful and insightful perspectives on our present day experience. But we need to hear alternative voices as well. In the book of Proverbs, voices from the ancient world challenge our perspective on and our understanding of life with ideas that have stood the test of time, that have demonstrated their insightfulness for generation after generation. We need to hear these voices all through the year. They help us understand life better, and they help us live life well.